May God open our eyes to see. May God open our ears to hear. May God open our hearts to love. Amen. Matthew's Gospel account of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth focuses on the figure of Joseph. Like Luke's, which is centred on the person of Mary, it is an account that was written decades after the life and death of Jesus. The birth narratives are not factual histories, but stories of meaning and mystery, told that we might understand the life and death of Jesus, and through his life, that we might understand the divine and our place within the divine. Given that it is a birth story, Matthew's account is rather strangely focused on a man and not on the woman who would actually give birth. So before reflecting on Joseph, and especially for those of you who weren't here last week, a quick word about Mary and her problematic virginity, and the popular but probably heretical Christian belief that Jesus had a human mother but no human father. Matthew's Jewish community used a 3rd century BC Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was called the Septuagint. The Septuagint mistranslated a key word in the passage that we heard read from Isaiah chapter 7. Alma means young woman. So the New Revised Standard Version of Isaiah that we heard read has it translated correctly. If Isaiah had really meant virgin, there was another word that he could have used, Bethulah. The Greek word used in Matthew's Gospel, quoting the Septuagint, is parthenos. And there are now suggestions that even this Greek word doesn't mean virgin in the sense that we understand it, but actually referred to a woman who had not yet given birth to a child, not to a lack of sexual experience. So we have got very tangled up in an interpretation which now so often blocks a deeper appreciation of the birth narratives. Matthew's birth story is interesting for other reasons too. If you look at the passage in context, you will discover that it follows one of those apparently boring genealogical lists that appear in a number of places in the Bible. But a closer look at Matthew's genealogy of Jesus reveals some very interesting problems and some particular details. First, there are women in this family tree. It's an overwhelmingly patrilineal family tree, a record of fathers and sons. So what are these 4 women, in addition to Mary, doing there? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth and Bathsheba, all Gentile women. Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute to seduce her father-in-law Judah, who had denied her justice. Rahab was actually a prostitute, and not just a Gentile, but a Canaanite, who saved the people of Israel and then became the great-great-grandmother of King David. Ruth was a Moabite. The Moabites were a polytheistic pagan people whom Israelites were forbidden to marry. Through great loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi, she wound up in Bethlehem and in the arms of Boaz, to whom she was definitely not married. The 4th woman mentioned in the list is the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba. This woman suffered sexual abuse and the murder of her husband by Israel's greatest king, and as a result, she too became an ancestor of Jesus. And then there was Mary, the only Jew in the list of women, but like the other 4, a woman on the edge. She became pregnant with Jesus before her marriage, and the child's father was not Joseph, to whom she was betrothed. All 5 of these women share something in common. Women who, despite the disgrace of their situations, spoke up and acted boldly. Despite their tainted reputations and the contempt of others, they were the subjects of their own lives, and they are an important part of our story. And they are part of the lineage of Jesus. Here they are not hidden. to be whispered about behind their backs. They are part of the story of grace and redemption that Matthew will tell, a grace that always includes outsiders alongside the most revered of ancestors. And the second thing to note about the genealogy is that it ends with a puzzle. The first verse indicates the following genealogy intends to show that Jesus, Messiah, is the son of David. Yet when the report reaches Joseph, we do not read, "And Joseph fathered Jesus." Instead, we get the rather genealogically awkward Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born. If you accept the virgin birth as it is traditionally understood, there is no biological connection between Jesus and the house of David. Clearly, though, there is a theological connection, and that is what matters to Matthew. And that connection happens because of the response of Joseph to the news that Mary, his betrothed, is pregnant. His initial response on discovering her apparent infidelity is to dismiss Mary quietly. Scholars differ on whether or not this was a harsh response, but given the option that he could have publicly shamed her and put her at risk of being stoned, I think it was undoubtedly the kinder path. We are told that Joseph was righteous. For Matthew's early Christians, the word righteous didn't mean hypocritical or judgmental, but faithful and good. Joseph obeys the law, but not strictly. He almost seems to foreshadow the thinking of Jesus, who said, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," in relation to the teaching of the tradition. Joseph, at this early stage, illuminates the tension of the prevailing understanding of God's commandments and the new thing that God is doing in Jesus. Commentator Alice Mackenzie observes that Joseph was no minor player in this drama. In order for the genealogy to make any sense at all, Joseph must accept Jesus as his son and give him a name which seals their relationship. To accomplish this in the face of what appeared to be expected of Joseph, which is divorcing Mary quietly, God sends to him an angel in a dream. This dream turns Joseph's understanding of the right thing to do totally on its head, and it transforms our understanding of righteousness from rigidity and legalism. It invites us to reconsider social expectations and conventions. Joseph's response has to do with trusting intuition and imagination, being in right relation with the dream of God. Before Jesus' teaching about law and love, before Jesus was even born, Joseph is a beautiful example of faith, not as belief in a list of propositions or adherence to a list of rules, but faith written on our hearts as we attune ourselves to the dream of God for ourselves and for our world. God is calling Joseph in a dream, and Joseph is open to a new interpretation and a new direction. In his sleepy state, he allows God to speak to the depths of his heart and propose a resolution to the dilemma that in his human reason, in daylight hours, he had not been able to discern. Joseph is not a hapless add-on to the story, cuckolded by another man or by the Holy Spirit. His faithfulness and imagination are exemplary. His story invites us on this last Sunday in Advent to hear a call to us to take another path, one that is not marked by the signposts of judgment, but by markers reminding us that compassion for the vulnerable is at the heart of God's intent for our world. Mary surely was vulnerable, and if she had lived to give birth to a child out of wedlock, that child's life would have been without protection. So Joseph, following the dream of God, took the baby Jesus in his arm and named him and claimed him as his own. As we get closer to Christmas Day, where do you encounter the call of God in your life? Where are the places that you hear the invitation to live outside social expectations and conventions? What boundaries will you cross? What risks will you take to allow the dream of God to come to expression in you? Jesus came to save, we are told. This doesn't have to involve belief in something supernatural. It is profoundly natural, part of the order of things, that the divine encounters us, is present with us, accompanies us as we respond to the call. It may come in dreams, or it may come in conversations with those we love, or it may come as we reflect on the needs and all that needs saving in our broken world. But we are assured that our life has meaning, that our life has purpose, and that there is reason to hope. As Mary and Joseph journeyed to the first Christmas, they did not know where God would take them. All they knew was that something wonderful had been promised and that they had been beckoned to follow. So this text calls us to rise and follow God's call, not knowing where the journey will take us or the path that God has set before us. And with this call comes a promise, the promise of Emmanuel, God with us. This is the gift of Matthew's Gospel, the promise made in the birth of Jesus and the promise made by Jesus at the end of his life, that God will be with us until the end of the age. In this promise, we may trust. May your Christmas be blessed with call and promise and trust, so that you too may be bearers of the light. Amen.